Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Pod Save the Youth. I'm your host, David Seaton.
And I'm Dallas Kazemi, one of your co-hosts.
And today we are talking all about the role of the press in protecting democracy. And we're excited to be joined today by a wonderful guest and my friend from high school. Hello, would you like to give a brief introduction?
Yes, hi everybody. My name's Ellen Niederhellman and I'm from Ipswich, Massachusetts. I work in local journalism with a focus on environmental journalism, as well as climate and public health-based communications.
And you're the perfect person to talk about this today because you're a reporter, you're young, and you're deeply passionate about this topic, and you can offer some really important insights to our conversation. So I just want to start by talking about where Americans actually get their news right now. In recent polls, nearly half of Americans have been shown to get their news primarily from social media. And for youth, this pattern is even more prevalent. Right now, young people are primarily getting their news on social media platforms like TikTok and Reddit. And I guess I'm just wondering, we can start with this question. Why do we think that young people, compared to older Americans, are using these social platforms at a higher rate? Is it because they are more accessible due to things like paywalls for more established news sources? Or is it just, a conscious choice?
I don't know if it's as much a conscious choice as it is youth have kind of grown up surrounded by different news sources, and social media has kind of become commonplace for a lot of students. So they've grown up surrounded with this availability of information. And I think that learning the balance between kind of creating this platform for themselves where they are trusting the news sources that appear on their feed, and can create a reliable news source, kind of what goes on your feed, students will be way more inclined to use it. I think that the students that want to find the information they're looking for can go and find it beneath and behind paywalls. But it's the availability of information that people are going towards and the ease that it's offered to them.
To add to that, I agree. I think as all of us can relate, whenever a young person is just scrolling on Instagram and they come in contact with the news, they may not think of any reason to go dive deeper into maybe a news outlet when it's just right there on their phones, um, especially with our attention spans going downhill. So like you said, availability, and it's just easier.
Yeah, I'll add one thing. I think in our town in Ipswich, I think it's a bit different because I've walked into school multiple times and I've seen young people in our classrooms, I've seen young people in the pods using the newspaper, the local newspaper, to get their information every day. And I think one of the reasons why that is because it's free for Ipswich residents, right? People get it in the mail every day. And that makes it a lot more accessible for young people who might be working a bunch of jobs, but still aren't able to pay for a newspaper an older person would get. I also want to talk about the role of social media companies as young people are getting their news from these sources. One problem with consuming news on social media is that social media companies are not responsible directly for the content that their creators publish or the news that these users, consumers, take in every day. This means that the news on social media does not have to be properly verified. This means that there could be more misinformation, more disinformation that youth could be susceptible to compared to other generations who would get their news from more trusted or reliable sources. Another problem with using social media to get your news is that the consumption of social media is feeding into these algorithms that are designed to keep young people on the platforms and not inform people. They're designed to drive people down rabbit holes of topics that they're already interested in. And this can lead to radicalization and just not exposing young people to a vast range of opinions or sources in their news consumption diet. Do we think that social media companies should be more responsible in a way for the content that is on their platforms, or do you think that these algorithms should be changed at all to make them more, reliable, providing real news to people?
I think it's a tricky question because a lot of news sources aren't taking accountability for that right now. And we've gotten to the point where there's so much flooding people's streams. It might not be realistic to be able to tack down all of the misinformation and disinformation. So I think, yes, ultimately it is the social media companies that should be responsible for this spreading, and it appearing on people's feeds in the algorithmic way that you're talking about. They should be responsible for that, but I think that it also unfortunately is falling on the shoulders of youth to be able, and adults as well, actually, to be able to decipher what they can trust and what they can't trust. And I think that that's something people are coming to realize, especially within some of the classes and students that I've been surrounded by are coming to realize that, which I think is important, especially with younger students as they wind up on social media and falling into these algorithms. Like you just said, I think that those teaching those sources is necessary, and then adults also getting a refresher on that. Just because news is easy and available to you doesn't mean that it's always accurate.
Yeah, 100%. And I think this kind of nicely leads into my next question, more for you, Delnas, because this is more of your expertise. How can we identify, how can young people identify misinformation when they see it on their social media platforms? And how can we move to more of a place where we're able to sort out the real information that we see, that we believe is news, from the misinformation and disinformation, and also just radicalizing information?
Sure. So yeah, if a young person is scrolling on their phone and they see some news alert, something's going on, I think first we'll look at who posted it. Obviously, look at the profile. It's very easy. Just click it. At times, it may be a reputable news outlet, and even then, you should look at the author, like who wrote the article that they posted about. But you may see that it's just some random unverified account with 10,000 followers. I think at that point, I'm not saying all of those are false, but I would say go to the website, look at who funds the website. Again, look at the author, look at their social media accounts. Are they verified? Where do they stand? Are they very biased when they write? Those are the first things to do. And when you read the title, you should think to yourself, do you feel intense emotion just by the title? Because chances are, if you do, that's a red flag. And yes, I understand even reputable news sources use clickbait at times, but you should be very aware of it, because a neutral news article should not be causing intense emotion just by reading 2 lines or a title. So just looking even surface level, just the profile, I think those are good first steps to take, and then diving deeper into the author and when the outlet was founded, things like that. Very important.
And you mentioned clickbait right there. And I think that's an important thing to bring up because, and I want to ask you, Ella, in your work, publishing stories, writing stories, how do you balance the need to get people interested in what you're reading based on like a catchy title or, some information in the story versus just trying to give people the basic facts?
I mean, it's tricky because I'm dealing with student perspective and students wanting to hear something and see something, but also adults within the community wanting to hear something and see something, and then occasionally teachers even. So it's a balancing act between trying to get all those perspectives to merge together into one common message or a bunch of different messages that all tie in together. So I would say usually I get that interest by bringing in a voice from different demographics in town or different groups that this article would touch into. So usually it's a student or two, a teacher, a parent, a community member, etc. when it comes to town issues. And then the same applies to when it's in the school system. I speak with staff, I speak with students. So I'm trying to get as many perspectives as I can. And with that, the interest comes from other people in the community that can relate to the voices found within the article. So I think interest comes from there, and then also the disconnect that can be seen between the voices in an article. A lot of kids seem to really enjoy the disconnect because it gives them an opportunity to voice their opinions, which is something I think that a lot of towns lack. And Ipswich has been fortunate to have that position with the paper, providing voices to younger students that want to be heard and community members that want to be heard. So when that disconnect comes into play, a lot of students want their voice to be heard and they take interest in it. And then the same applies to the older people that might be found on Facebook that want to comment and see if their friends feel the same way. So the interest comes where there's the disconnect, but also when all the different voices are heard. And then also sometimes I try to end each article with a call to action or something that either brings people together, gives them an action plan, or gives them an idea of how they can contribute or continue to learn more. And I think that continues to spark interest. That's prolonged interest in what's being produced and how it's being produced. So that ultimately ties back into the paper.
Yeah, absolutely. And that diversity of perspectives that you mentioned is so important, but it's also something that's really lacking in a lot of Americans' news consumption today. According to a study by Boston University, the American general public right now largely consumes media that only aligns with their own political opinions. A large number of Americans consume political news as also a source of entertainment instead of actual content that could really change or enhance their understanding of a certain issue or a politician or political race. This is the role of media either to inform or entertain the public.
Ultimately, I feel like it is to inform. Obviously, it depends on the outlet, but the encompassing role is to inform. I think that's why we have it so readily available to us, and it's been skewed to entertain. As Dennis mentioned, it has to do with those headlines and the clickbait that a lot of people are looking for. So I think that effective media and timely media is centered in information and that desire to inform. And when you kind of see the entertaining aspect, that can be somewhat of a red flag. I think that the position I'm in is somewhat of a unique position, and local journalism is tied a lot into entertainment as well. Like there was a horse that fell through the floorboards of a local farm and a picture that ran in a cartoon with it last week, but it was right next to an important piece on a local election and how those issues are going to play in this fall. So it's a balance, I think, in order to keep interest and then keep entertainment as well, and then all be centered in correct available news.
Yeah, just to add to that, I mean, the obvious answer is that news should be focused on informing, not entertaining. But I spoke to somebody who offered this argument. They mentioned that news outlets are still a business and they need to attract their consumers. So at the end of the day, it would be much better if news outlets didn't focus so much on the entertainment aspect, but it is in our hands to really realize what's fake, what's real, what's biased, what's neutral, through the tips I mentioned. But I mean, of course, if I were to picture an ideal scenario, there wouldn't be, you know, as much money involved, thirst for a huge audience. It would be purely for informing the public on important issues.
I also want to talk about some politicians who are making their careers off of entertaining the public kind of by attacking the media. Most notably, former President Trump, their current Republican nominee for president again. In the 2016 campaign, he kind of shocked the nation by picking on CNN at his rallies and talking about how the press was kind of against him. And then in the 2020 election, after Joe Biden won the election freely and fairly, Trump went on the offense against even conservative media networks like Fox News, trying to discredit them and make his supporters kind of riled up against all sorts of media platforms across the political spectrum who just, reported the truth about the presidential election. So did the threat from Donald Trump towards the press, did it materialize in the way that we expected? And is it more difficult to be a reporter today in the wake of the Trump presidency and in this current time where there are so many Americans who are hostile to free and fair reporting?
I can't speak to before Trump's presidency, but I entered into the field of journalism. I think it was April of 2020, so it was right after all these issues you just described with Donald Trump. So right after all that chaos, it was kind of scary to enter into that field, and obviously it was just local journalism at the time. So I didn't feel that imminent threat of against the media, which still is kind of prolonged. But if anything, I feel like there's an opportunity now following all of that, because there's an opportunity to kind of be that voice of truth and fact in the media that I feel like a lot of people are searching for right now. There's so much misinformation and so much news on extremist tendencies that a lot of people are lost in where to find their news, what voices to trust, and where that comes from. So if we have a lot of reporters going into the field now that are focused in providing that truth in an unbiased manner, then I think that we can kind of recorrect all of that harm that was caused, and the threats that were put against the media, in the instances you just described. And I think that if anything, that provides an opportunity.
I love your positive approach to that because I was going to take a much more pessimistic one. Um, we can't lie. What Trump has said about the media and about reporters is so dangerous. Like it's not even just bad politics, it's dangerous. However, I changed my mind that everything's going downhill, and I agree with you that there is really good opportunity, but we actually like people to get in there like you're doing and really work hard in providing neutral and true reporting. But at the same time, it is a dangerous time for reporters, not only threats that they may receive, but also for the public as a whole believing the nonsense out there and, taking that information and going and voting based on what was provided in articles or whatever it may be that they consumed. It is terrifying knowing that people are voting based on false information. But yeah, I mean, the more factual reporting there is, the less likely it is that that will happen. So just need to keep working hard.
That's your job, Ella. Keep working, protect
Yeah, that's
the
all on you.
And I do want to talk about local media too, because while the national media has been in the political spotlight for a while, and it's where a lot of people think about when they think about media in general. I know I did a focus group at Ipswich the other month, and no one said that they get their media, when I asked the question, from the local news, even though everyone in that group has probably read the local paper, maybe even that week, right? I think that local papers are often seen as somehow different and separate from this national political debate, which is one of the reasons why data shows from the Pew Research Center, local media is the most trusted form of journalism that exists in America today. In recent years, despite this widespread trust in local media, a number of local media networks have closed in the United States. We've seen that since 2005, roughly a third of US local media networks have shut down. And every week in the United States, an average of 2 local news networks close. So in recent years, this trend has only been increasing. And Ella, I'll ask you, what makes the Ipswich local news different from this trend? How has it supported itself and kind of provided for itself in the wake of these headwinds against local media?
Yeah, so I jumped on board in, as I said, April of 2020, right after my bosses, John and Kristen Muldoon, started the paper in around 2019. So it was fairly new at the time, and they came in kind of out of nowhere as at first just an online newspaper that was providing reliable news. And then they kind of picked up headway and eventually became print. And that's when I joined as it was a very, very small group at the time that I joined. And I was able to provide that student perspective and student voice and help to bring in a different demographic that was reading the paper each week. So with that, I got students and parents involved, and more community members were reading the paper as it grew each week. There was more interest in what my bosses were reporting on and what different journalists were reporting on. And we're a nonprofit newspaper, so I would say that also a lot came from that. And we're basically entirely dependent on community support and how the community looks at the paper, what they want to give, and what they want to provide for us. So I think that a lot of that balance is directly attributed to the community and how they reacted when my bosses first started publishing here. The news was reliable and continues to be reliable, and it's unbiased. So it doesn't lean in any political manner, and it doesn't in that way disrupt anybody in town. In fact, it provides an opportunity for people in town to voice their opinions on matters. We have a letters to the editor section where people can send in anything, well, with some exceptions, about their political thoughts or thoughts on local elections, who they support, or thoughts on town issues, basically anything they want the community to hear. So that in itself provided a platform for community members to be heard and to share their thoughts. And the articles that were being written allowed for a continually expanding group to be heard and recognized and thought of as important within our community. So I think because of all that combined, a lot of people started supporting it and continue to support it. Now we have a distribution beyond town borders into surrounding towns because the news was just that reliable and just that unbiased that everybody came to rely on it for their local news, and the humor aspect that I had mentioned earlier. Our cartoons and that balance definitely helps to keep interest. So we get a lot of fan mail in the mail sometimes when we get donations, and sometimes we get hate mail, but that means that we're doing it right. So I think that just that opportunity for community involvement and the reliance that our community has had on the paper and basically kind of unifying around certain issues, and having those different perspectives that I mentioned earlier, that has all helped the paper to grow and the community to grow as a result of the paper.
Yeah, that success story has been, I mean, so encouraging to me for local media. And I will tell you, I take full advantage of that letter to the editor
I
section.
know. Yes, you do.
I think that local papers are absolutely essential in holding elected officials, local elected officials accountable, because national news networks, unless there's a super big scandal, are not going to cover anything like that. And if the free press is not localized, then there's no way for local residents to really understand if a city council member, a select board member, a finance committee member, someone who might fall under the fray is doing something that maybe they shouldn't be doing. So I'll ask, if these trends continue that we're seeing in the United States with local papers shutting down at an alarming rate, are local democracies able to survive in the same way that they've been functioning before?
It's an interesting concept, and I do think that that is very dangerous as we continue to see these political tendencies toward extremism and these skewed media reports and sources. I think that local journalism definitely have been very fortunate to participate in and to experience the impact that that's had on the community. I think if anything, local democracies have definitely benefited from the paper, and it's kind of been distributed both ways. So when the local democracy has, whether it's a representative to be elected or some sort of debate, that goes in the paper, and the paper thus grows, and then that support is translated back to the election. So I think that there's this act there, it goes both ways, like it can be mutual, and people don't seem to understand that. And when you have these skewed political sources, then it doesn't work in that manner. It's no longer unbiased, and there's no mutual benefits between the two. And I think that that is a big threat to local democracies and people understanding the people that they're electing into office and how that will impact their town. So I think that Ipswich in itself, although it may seem crazy when they're debating the smallest things in the paper or on Facebook, we are very fortunate to have those platforms for people to speak out and to understand the full threshold of local democracy and what's going on within our town. So I think if anything, it's a model for other local papers to follow.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll ask just one final question. Ella, where can supporters go to support your work and the Ipswich local news?
So as I said, we're a nonprofit. So if you're within the town, donate if you can. If not, read the news. We're also online. And now, as I said, we're distributed to some local towns. So follow along on social media sites, online, and just read the paper each week. Anything that we can share or get out to the world, then people, it comes right back to us and people want to share their perspectives. And if you have any article ideas or you want to hear a topic discussed in the paper, we are always open to article inquiries. And as I said, we're continually growing, which I think is a very unique role to be in. So taking full advantage of that and sharing what we can with Cape Ann in this area will continue, that'll continue to grow as well.
Yes, after following all of the paper's socials, I would like everyone to check out my organization as well. It's called Do You Know What You Know? I believe I mentioned it on the podcast before, but we are focused on educating everybody on disinformation detection and news bias detection. And so on Instagram, we are dyk.wyk, and on Twitter X, we are dyk.wyk. And one of our podcast guests previously on our podcast mentioned some good sources to visit for learning more about this. One of them is commonsense.org. There is All Sides, where basically it rates different news outlets on their like bias scale. There is a lot of other ones, and you can find that on our in our bio, dyk.wyk on Instagram. So yeah, go check it out. In addition to the paper's socials, as mentioned before.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you all next week.